Thank you. Good morning, President Groom and members of the Board of Supervisors. My name is Boris Lipkin. I'm the Northern California Regional Director for the California High-Speed Rail Authority. And what I'm doing here today is, and I appreciate the time that you've given me here, is to give you an update on our next milestone in bringing high-speed rail to Northern California. What we're doing today is the work on sharing the staff recommendations for the state's preferred alternatives in Northern California. We have two project sections. In sort of SQL parlance, it's the identification of the proposed project, if you will. So, and before I kind of jump into it, maybe as a point on big picture high-speed rail things, there's been a lot of conversation about whether it's moving forward or not. This is our next milestone in implementation. And so what you're seeing today and what our board will be asked to do in September is continue to move along with the process and bringing high-speed rail to this region. So, and I'll go through this, and I'm happy to answer questions throughout and at the end. So what we're sharing today is the staff recommendations. This is for the preferred alternatives. We have a range of alternatives in the two Northern California project sections. The one I'm going to talk about is the San Francisco to San Jose project section. Everything will be analyzed at the same level of detail in the EIR that's coming out in early 2020. But what we're doing now is, having released the staff recommendations, looking for feedback from communities along the route, and so we're doing a lot of engagement over the next 2 months before we bring that to the board, our board of directors, for their decision in September of this year. Identifying the state's preferred alternative is not a final decision. It doesn't approve a project, but it sort of gives communities along the way an understanding of where we might be headed, what's most likely to come out of the process. So in San Francisco to San Jose, we've been refining alternatives and working through the routing since probably about 2005. And the starting point for sort of some of that early prehistory was the big decision of whether to go through the Altamont Pass or through the Pacheco Pass. That was a decision that was made in 2008 to go through Pacheco, and at that point the focus became on how do we get up the peninsula, basically. And in kind of the early years of that conversation, we had proposed a dedicated 4-track system that had a lot of effects and a lot of impacts and a lot of reaction from communities. In 2012, there was sort of a big milestone that was reached in a 9-party agreement, including the region and the authority, focused on moving the Caltrain electrification project forward as a project in its own right, as well as a foundation element of high-speed rail, while ensuring that even with our implementation, the work will be on a blended corridor, looking to maintain a primarily 2-track system. With that, Caltrain moved forward with environmental clearance of the electrification project and was able to accomplish that and get that into construction in 2017. And then what we've been doing is working with them on the blended system planning of identifying the infrastructure needed to add high-speed rail to the corridor. And what we're doing now is clearing those elements of infrastructure to add high-speed rail. The last thing I'll mention in terms of timeline, in 2018, our business plan redefined the valley-to-valley line. So our kind of planned goal of where we would start full service would be from connecting Silicon Valley to Central Valley. In 2016 plan, the idea was that could be an interim spot with San Jose as a terminus in Northern California. In 2018, it really made sense to bring that all the way to San Francisco with the electrification project, and that has a slight implication for where a maintenance facility would be located. So that's the last kind of input into this process. Throughout the kind of last couple of years, we've done a lot of work with both our agency partners across the region, and you can see a list of those in the various interactions we've had, as well as with communities and community groups. We've had over 500 meetings in the corridor over the last 3 years, and then a broad range of engagement, whether it's through our community working groups, the monthly meetings of the city-county staff coordinating group and the local policymaker group, which are through Caltrain, but we're partners with them on those, as well as open houses and other engagements. So what you're seeing here today is already a reflection of a whole lot of public input that we have received over the process, and of course we're looking for more as we get into our kind of summer time frame and getting feedback on the way to the September board meeting. So in San Francisco San Jose project section, we have 2 alternatives that we're looking at, and I'll try to quickly describe them. They have a series of common elements. The corridor will look familiar. This is the Caltrain corridor, so that's the yellow line. They have a series of common elements. So, for example, a station at Millbrae, a station at the 4th and King yard in San Francisco, and most of the corridor stays the same. Where there's kind of the two different key differentiators are the location of a light maintenance facility. So in alternative A, we're looking at a light maintenance facility on the east side of the tracks in Brisbane. Alternative B has it on the west side. And then the second differentiator is whether there's the need for a passing track in the middle of the corridor between San Mateo and Redwood City. So San Mateo County is the heart of our two key differentiators. And what I'll share is kind of the staff recommendations on both of those items and which alternative we're proposing to our board to identify as the state's preferred. Oh, this actually clicks through it, so I apologize. I was just talking to the finished slide. So the light maintenance facilities in Brisbane, what we've looked at, this is on the Bayland site. So alternative A has it on the east side, focused closer to the 101 side, between the 101 and the tracks and north of the lagoon. On alternative B, it's on the west side, closer to the town. And then in terms of the passing tracks, this has been a long process of looking at what passing tracks may or may not be necessary for what types of levels of service. It started with the original blended system analysis from 2012, saying that to add 2 high-speed rail trains to the corridor, you didn't need any passing tracks, but for adding up to 4 trains an hour, you would likely potentially need a series of passing tracks. This work has been done in close coordination with Caltrain, looking at various options starting in 2013 and then going through into 2016, narrowing from the 3 options of passing tracks that we had at that time, which were a short middle 4, so this is middle being the middle of the tracks, a long middle 4 and a middle 3 track section, and then a no passing track alternative. From that, we narrowed to the 2 options that we're carrying today and we'll be looking at in the environmental documents, so a no additional passing track alternative and the short middle 4 passing track alternative. And then we've continued to do that work of looking at with passing tracks. It's really a trade-off between physical infrastructure, signaling improvements, and then service planning that you can do. And so that's what work has continued through our process as well as the Caltrain business plan process, and we'll continue to move that forward. These are the 2 passing track options that we eliminated in the 2016-2017 timeframe. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on those, but there's additional information available on them. The one that we're carrying forward is the 6-mile option between San Mateo and Redwood City. It changes to the San Carlos Caltrain station that come with it, but it's already a fully grade separated corridor in that part so that's why the focus is on that segment. In terms of grade crossings, there's lots of those across the corridor. What we're proposing is upgrades to all of the grade crossings, including 4 quad barriers, so that arms come down on both sides of the crossing, channelization to prevent cars from trying to veer around a gate crossing, and then there's already a lot of fencing, but making sure that there's full fencing along the corridor. And that's common between the alternatives. So to kind of cut to the chase, what we looked at is sort of trying to find the balance between system performance characteristics, so this is for high-speed rail and for Caltrain, and as part of that, environmental factors and community factors, and looking at how we can balance those 3 sets of effects and in proportion and give the recommendation to our board of directors. Our recommendation after all of that work, and I'll explain more of this, is alternative A. So this is the East Brisbane light maintenance facility site and no passing tracks in the middle of the corridor. When we did the analysis, and there's an appendix in the slide deck that has a lot of numbers behind this, what we see in terms of system performance is a slight trade-off between slightly slower travel time for high-speed rail with alternative A and slightly faster travel time for Caltrain. So the passing track has a couple-minute difference in travel time, but not something that's so substantial that would require the passing track for the level of service that we're looking at. When we come to the community factors, we looked at a variety of them, and across the board, alternative A was a better performing alternative than alternative B.
Madam Chair, I have a quick question.
Certainly.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm just curious why Brisbane is the preferred location, and then what other locations were considered?
Sure. If you don't mind, I'm going to skip to a slide I have in the appendix because we actually have that in here as well.
Okay.
The other location, oh, I guess it wasn't included. So the other locations that we had looked at, it's fine, I can talk to it. The other locations that we had looked at, one was at the Port of San Francisco, and then one was at San Francisco International Airport. Those sites both had their own sets of constraints that made them infeasible and were not advanced past kind of the early evaluation stage. Brisbane, the advantage is that the Bayland site is a large currently open at least, location, and maintenance facility is about 100 acres, so there's just very limited number of those that are within easy reach of San Francisco, which is the key in that for startup and end of service, you want the maintenance facility to be somewhere relatively close to where trains are going to end up at the end of the day or need to start up at the beginning of the day.
Yeah, the reason I was asking that is because I'm sure you're familiar about the Baylands development. I don't know what the exact number is in terms of housing, maybe between 1,800 and 2,300 units of housing, and I was just curious to how that would work. And then in addition, the infrastructure, right? So you have Tunnel Road. There are certain changes that might have to be made in one. I think it's the preferred. I think it's A, East. Mm-hmm. And so, have you worked with the city of Brisbane and I'm just kind of curious to sort of their feedback and understand from you, how this is going to work moving forward, considering that you're going to have a tremendous amount of commercial and then housing.
Sure. So one of the things that we looked at is the compatibility with local land use planning. So on the west side of the site at Baylands is where the housing is planned for, along with, or in a mixed-use zone, along with commercial, and it's commercial on the east side. We wanted to avoid the housing from an impact standpoint to begin with, and then additionally from the standpoint of putting a light maintenance facility further away from the housing as an additional element on the other side of the tracks. We have certainly been working with the city, and I know the mayor is here, so I don't want to put words in their mouth by any means, because I know we're coming to their council in a week or two as well to hear more of their feedback. And we've also been in coordination and in touch with Universal Paragon, who's the property owner there, and planning the development. So we have at every stage in the general plan process commented about the light maintenance facility sites being these ones that we're looking at. We do think that there are ways to create compatibility between the light maintenance facility and the rest of the planned development, but that will require continued coordination, certainly with the city and with the property owner there. So we are certainly going to be continuing those conversations.
Great, thanks. And I just wanted to introduce the mayor of Brisbane, Madison Davis, and then the city manager, Clay Holstein.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Supervisor Slocum.
Thank you, Madam President. Just a couple of quick questions, and I'm just going to list them all, but on the chart that's on the screen right now, it says that the top item is residential displacements and followed by two other different kinds of displacement issues. I'm wondering if you could talk about the residential displacements part of this just briefly. And also I'm interested to learn just a little bit about temporary increases in emergency response time in northern Redwood City and Belmont, San Carlos, and San Mateo,
Sure.
if you could.
So those are both elements that are mostly tied to the location of that passing track in alternative B. And so by not having the passing track, we avoid the displacements because we don't need to acquire right-of-way outside the existing corridor for the service. And then the temporary increases, those are a factor in alternative B, because as you're building out the corridor, you're adding those two tracks, you would have to have temporary road closures during construction that would have an impact to response times. And so those are primarily factors in alternative B that are not factors in alternative A.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you.
Madam President, while we're asking a couple of questions, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the passing track. So if I understand your preferred alternative, that there would be no passing track anywhere in the corridor?
So there are two existing four-track sections on the Caltrain corridor today. We would also have
In addition, I'm sorry.
We would also have a four-track section at the Millbrae station, but we would not have a passing track in the middle of the corridor. And if I may, I might just quickly jump to a slide that I have from the Caltrain business plan. So this is basically all of that work has been in conjunction with the Caltrain team doing the business plan and looking at, this is one of their slides, but looking at the baseline scenario that they have. So they're looking at 3 growth scenarios. One is the baseline growth, which is basically the existing 6, or the planned 6 Caltrains an hour plus 4 high-speed rail trains. They're looking at higher levels of growth. Those start to become where you really see need for various passing tracks in those scenarios. The baseline growth is what we're focused in on, is basically that high-speed rail component of getting to that 6 and 4 level of service. And both from our analysis and the business plan analysis, that there's a kind of a reasonable range of service plans for Caltrain and for us to be able to operate without the need for a passing track in the middle of the corridor. So that's kind of the work.
So
that
your recommendation is assuming the baseline, there's a 3 potential growth scenarios which the Caltrain board will be considering. First, take a step back. There's been a incredible business plan effort that's been going on for a long time, and it's about to come to the conclusion. And one of the fundamental things is to pick a kind of design around a level of service. So there are the 3: the baseline, kind of the moderate, and the more extensive. So your recommendation is assuming the baseline.
I wouldn't look at it that way. Everything is incremental. So to get to those higher levels of service, you need to add more infrastructure and make other changes.
Right.
And so what our agency is clearing environmentally is the component of the baseline. So what's been cleared to date is the 6 Caltrains, nothing for high-speed rail, has been cleared through the Caltrain modernization EIR that was done. What we're clearing environmentally is that next layer on top of that, which is the high-speed rail components. So that's the Millbrae Station, that's some curve straightening, that's the light maintenance facility, all of those components. If the Caltrain board, which I understand I'm talking to somebody who holds the cards here on that decision, adopts one of the higher levels of growth beyond the baseline, those are infrastructure that will be needed to continue to upgrade the corridor for those higher levels of service. It will require additional environmental clearance to get to those points. So I think what you see is kind of how, just as when the original blended system was kind of adopted as a concept, we were able to quickly move forward with the Caltrain piece of it, and we spent the next 3, 4, 5 years working together on defining what those high-speed rail pieces would need to be to add to that to create a truly blended system. I think we're kind of at the same milestone point where we're kind of there on the high-speed rail piece, and now we're looking at the next future and planning for the next planning horizon, which is not just adding high-speed rail to the corridor. It's very likely to be something much more than that, which is great, which we're fully supportive of and certainly a part of, but that's outside of sort of the scope of our agency's engagement here.
Okay, that's helpful to put that all in perspective. And one thing during my tenure on the board, I don't know if you've ever had a high-speed rail presentation, so I think it's really great that you're here. And it makes me think, Madam President, that we should have the Caltrain board come after the business plan is released and do a similar presentation, because I think, as everyone's aware, we're on the cusp of just a revolutionary change in this corridor. And I think it's going to be a long time, a real long time. I don't know if we'll ever see high-speed rail, but we are going to see a real intensification of the use of that corridor, and which affects all of us, everyone in the county, and of course all of the members of the board. So we'll arrange to have Caltrain come and lay out these different, summarize the work of this really impressive business plan effort they've been undertaking. And again, really glad you could come and speak to us.
Sure. And I think I only have a couple slides, and then I can wrap up. So
No, please take as much time as you need.
Okay, thank you. On environmental justice, we're really looking at disproportionate impacts for low-income minority populations compared to the reference population. So that's another one for alternative A. And then finally, on the environmental factors, we're really looking at wetlands and waters of the U.S. So this is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers really has a strong regulatory view on that, as well as protected habitat for a certain species. So this is both kind of in the Brisbane area. So I talked about that one. So when we kind of wrap all of that up, our kind of staff recommendation is for alternative A, combining the lower impacts on natural resources, fewer displacements, the reasonable trade-offs in travel time for slightly slower travel time for us, slightly faster for Caltrain, and then policy alignment on the business plan with the baseline scenario out of that process. We have fact sheets that kind of summarize all of this. I think my staff might have handed those to you, and they're available. Our next steps are in July. We're doing a whole series of community working group presentations, including in San Mateo County. In August, we'll be doing open houses and then bringing all of this feedback that we get to our board of directors at their September meeting. That puts us on track for a March release of the draft environmental document, 45-day public comment period, and then looking to finalize the environmental document in 2021. The upcoming CWG meetings, community working groups, will be in Burlingame on July 24th, and then for the open house, will be in Sequoia High School on August 19th in the county. If for folks who, if the Board of Supervisors or others in your communities want to send us feedback on the recommendations, we're looking to get those by August 22nd so that we can incorporate those in our staff report to our Board of Directors at the September 17th board meeting. And there's a variety of ways to give us that feedback. Of course, the board will also hold its meeting in the region in San Jose on September 17th, and that's another opportunity to provide feedback. That's the end of what I have today.
Questions? Supervisor Pi.
Just a couple more for you. Kind of just taking a step up to a higher level, could you just give us just a quick summary of where things stand in the Central Valley work in terms of its current funding status, its current completion predictions, and then when you finish that, okay, we'll let you answer that one first.
Well, maybe I'll kind of give you the broader context of what it is that we're doing kind of statewide and the focus on the Valley as well. So we released our 2019 project update report on May 1st. So this is our odd year report to the legislature. We have a even year business plan that we do. So we have one big document a year. And so the 2019 project update report really focused on the same three priorities that we've had for at least since 2016, which is get into service as soon as possible, continue to make investments that have immediate benefits and then can become part of the system over time, so like Caltrain electrification, similar projects in Southern California, and then get everything else shovel-ready, so get through environmental clearance and continue to advance that work in pursuit of additional funding. And so that's what we're doing in Northern California. That's what we're also doing in Southern California. So right now we have 119 miles under construction that is, been there. I think we started in 2015. So we're about 4 years into that. We have several more years to go. The goal is to finish not just the 119, and what the governor has kind of laid out for us is to extend that all the way to Merced and down to Bakersfield. So that adds about another 50 miles to that first tranche, and then get that into an interim service connecting to the ACE service and the San Joaquin services that go to the Bay Area as an interim step on getting to the Valley-to-Valley line while we continue to pursue environmental clearance. And then the next steps for us here in Northern California will be right-of-way acquisition, utility relocations, third-party agreements, and then, of course, substantial construction. So the work in the Valley plus the kind of pre-works in Northern California and then the bookends are fully funded. There will need to be substantial additional funding for completing the Pacheco Pass tunnels as well as other construction that we have in Northern California. The history of this project has been that, Prop 1A was passed in 2008. It called for a $9 billion down payment and asked us to find matching funds from sources that didn't exist at the time. We've been able to fully match those funds and more to date. We will need to find additional funding sources to continue to advance the program. So that's...
Yeah, with regard to the funding sources, I mean, there was hope from, I think, the beginning that there'd be private financing would emerge. And is there anything on the horizon that you can talk to?
Well, where we see kind of private financing coming into play is off of the revenues that the system will generate, being able to monetize those towards expansion. So when we really see that as playing a major role is when we finish the Valley-to-Valley line, so get from Silicon Valley to Central Valley, you start to connect two of the regions of the state and really drive those travel markets. So you're reducing the trip from, say, San Jose to Fresno from a 3 or 4 hour car ride to a 1 hour train ride. And so that starts to really capture a lot more of that travel market. And that's where the kind of there's enough value generated that the private sector would be positioned to invest and then help us expand the system to, for example, get to Los Angeles. So certainly those conversations continue, but we kind of look at it as the initial investment coming from the public sector, then driving the private investment as another component of the funding picture as we get going.
Okay. And then finally, maybe more of a comment. An incredibly important need on the peninsula is grade separations. Because under the various growth scenarios for the corridor, we will have really serious east-west traffic flow problems, and these are very, very expensive, as you know. It's my understanding high-speed rail is building a number of grade separations in the Central Valley work, and I know that high-speed rail has contributed some funds to the San Mateo grade sep work. And I think there's going to have to be a contribution by high-speed rail on further grade separations, just because given the scope and magnitude of what has to be done here. So again, more of a comment. If you want to add your own perspective, that would be helpful.
Well, I'll say a couple things. I think, so first, kind of in the Central Valley, the need for grade separations comes from the operating speeds in that corridor. So when you're operating at above 125 miles an hour, the entire corridor has to be grade separated. And so in the Valley, we're operating at up to 220 miles an hour. So there's no way to build the system there with, the travel times requirements that we have without those grade separations. So that's an essential component of the project in that part of the dedicated corridor. In blended corridors, like what we have here, when you're operating up to 110 miles an hour, grade separations are not required. At the same time, we certainly understand, there's every city in the peninsula is planning for one or more grade separations. I do think it's a positive step. The business plan is starting to look at that from a more regional perspective. There's certainly a state role as well. It's not just high-speed rail. There's also CalSTA and other parts of the state that are active components. We are about a 50% funding partner in the San Mateo grade separation. That one was a particular opportunity in that when that project was being put together, there was the open question of whether passing tracks would be needed. And so to ensure that that design would accommodate a potential passing track should it become needed, through our process, we agreed to be a funding partner with, I believe the county is a heavy partner. It's a city, but I think it's there's a bucket of county funds through the TA. Thank you. As well as, Caltrain is working on that project. So, we certainly see those as important opportunities and important things that we will, be a part of. How all that shakes out and, it develops, I think time will tell, frankly.
Okay, again, thanks for coming today.
All right.
Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
We'll go to item 30.